Hello everyone, welcome to day 26 of our 30 days of watercolor flowers. Today we are painting amaranthus. A lot of people also call this amaranth, but I really like amaranthus, so that's what I'm sticking with today. But this flower is a very textured, kind of spiky hanging flower, and it hangs in these bunches that drape down. So it's got a lot of texture. It's a really beautiful color. There can be many different variations of the color from really light pale green to darker greens to pinks to reds. My favorite was this very deep red color we're going to paint today. For the greenery, amaranthus has these very large pale green leaves that have a tiny bit of pink in them sometimes. This is a bushy type flower, and so we're just painting the leaves in and among the amaranthus to get the layered draping look. The leaves also have some very defined veining, and so I'll show you my favorite way to get that look with watercolor. We're going to start by mixing up the color for our amaranthus flower, and we're going to be mixing some cad red, some alizarin crimson, and some opera rose together to get this beautiful pinky red color. We're also going to make sure we're starting with our lightest version of this color, so we're adding lots of water, and then I'm going to be making marks to mimic the texture of the amaranthus. So if you look at a reference picture, it's very textural because the ends of the amaranthus are really pointy, but they're really bunched up together and form a very long draping cone. So I'm using kind of the side of my brush to make these quick short strokes that end up really textural on the edges, but give us that blended feeling of the flowers together in the grouping, but also making sure to leave some white space so we can tell there are individual flowers in this grouping and it's not just one flower that's creating the cone, it's a group of flowers creating the cone. Now we're going to create many different arms coming down from the amaranthus in this long cone shape. So just keep in mind that all of these arms are made up of tiny little flowers that are kind of pokey. So we're going to make sure to produce lots of texture. I'm also making sure that my first shapes I'm making are in a very light wash, and then I can go in with a darker pigment of my alizarin crimson and add that to one side to create a shadow. So for me, I'm imagining that my light source is coming from the right side. So everything on the right is going to stay in my initial light color. And then I'm going to add that darker pigment on the left side to create shadow. Also, having this darker pigment on the left side is going to be able to help us define the different arms that are going to be hanging down. We want a little bit of white space between them. You can see I've created that here, where you can see some definition between the arms without them having this giant space between them, but they're almost connected. They definitely look like they're together, but having the light tones, mid-tones, and dark tones in this piece is going to really help us define where the arms are, where the shadows are, and make everything look like it has so much depth. So what I like to do is that initial color that I've put down in the lighter wash is a lot more blended together. There's a little bit of white space, but overall it's more of a blob. And then as I go in with my mid-tones and my darker tones, I am doing a lot more choppier, shorter strokes that are separate from each other, that have a lot of hard lines, so that you can see the definition in the flowers, but you still have a lot of depth because we're creating those light tones, mid-tones, and dark tones that are layered on top of each other. Also with amaranthus, it's important to get that very layered look. If you look at a reference picture, they are not singular, they're very bunched together, and I'm talking about the arms. So the arms are just layered on top of each other. So one way to do that is to create very prominent arms first that are definitely in the front. You can do another arm kind of off to the side like I did up here that is kind of hanging down, curved over the group. That gives a lot of movement because we can see that there's a starting point and it's coming down and around and hanging. And then we can put another arm underneath that one and tuck it in so that it really looks layered. It gives a nice visual effect for the amaranthus as a whole. And at this point, this is all pretty much repetitive. We just continue to add arms, layering this lighter color first, then using darker pigment to add shadows and contrast, and then continuing to layer more of these arms on top. So I will get to more of the instructions when we get to the leaves, but for now, if you like to watch things in real time and the full experience, I will let you do that. So at this point, we are not finished adding the amaranthus flower arms, but we are going to start painting the leaves because if you look at a reference picture, the leaves are kind of tucked in and layered over all of these beautiful draping flowers. And so I have sap green. I've mixed it up with the green that's already on my palette. And I've mixed in a lot of water because we want it to be a really light wash. Not only because this is our first layer of watercolor, but also because the leaves of this flower are really, really light in color. So some of the added contrasting color I'm adding in are like bright yellows to just really enhance the brightness of this green. Now, with these leaves, while they are still wet, we are going to turn our brush over to the other end and we are gently going to press in some lines for the veining. Now, the reason this is so great is because with watercolor, when we push into the paper and create these indents, the watercolor flows into that indent, creating a naturally slightly darker line, creating the veining. And I love doing this because it looks a lot more natural and light and organic than if I was to paint it with my brush. The leaves on the amaranthus are very large, so I am painting them using my two-stroke method, but I am using a lot more strokes on either side of the white vein. So I'm making one half of the leaf, making it larger around the middle and more pointed at the end. Then I'm going to the other side of the white space, leaving some white space and painting another section. It's kind of like a really long heart that doesn't have a very steep dip at the top. So I've painted some leaves at the bottom and I'm painting some leaves at the top to kind of overlap this amaranthus we've already painted. And then after we paint these leaves, we are going to tuck some of the amaranthus behind these leaves. And you can see here the leaf is still wet and I've picked up that same pink color I've used for the amaranthus and I've just dotted it in a couple of places, mostly around the edge. And this is because if you look at a reference picture, there are some little pink hints in the amaranthus leaf. So I thought it looked really nice. Make sure you don't overdo it. Just a little bit goes a long way. And I like to balance it out with having larger spots and then a couple of tinier spots so it doesn't feel too symmetrical. And I'm going to continue to paint a few more leaves in the same way. So I will see you back again when we paint some more amaranthus. Okay, we're going to let those leaves dry. We're picking up that same pink color we've been using for our amaranthus, and we're going to continue that curve that is like that imaginary curve of where the amaranthus is starting, where all of these leaves and arms are coming into, and we're going to bring that up around the leaves so that we get the illusion that there is more amaranthus in the back that these leaves are hiding just a little bit. As you're painting the amaranthus and you're bringing it down towards the tip, make sure you have a lot of varying lengths. That will make it look a lot more organic. So some of them are going to be really short, and then some are going to be really long. You can even make one that is far longer than the other ones. And then up here, I'm going to make one that is really short. So it plays around with motion and depth and makes a lot of interest for your piece. So I'm going to continue painting these in the same way as before, where I am adding the light tones, the mid-tones, and the dark tones, and you'll see as everything starts to dry, I'm going to continue adding darker and darker tones. So I will come back on and talk more when we get to the very shadowed spots. So you can see at this point I have maintained my light colors. I've increased so much pigment in some of those shadowy areas, especially under the leaves and where the amaranthus is overlapping. Now I'm picking up some sap green and I'm going to mix it into my red mixture that I already have on my palette. And I'm doing this because red and green are complementary colors. They're opposite each other on the color wheel, so they tend to cancel each other out. And when you add them to each other, they give you a muted version of that color. So I'm adding green to red to get a deeper red. It's a very shadowy, like black red. It's so beautiful. So I'm adding that very minimally in those dark, shadowy areas. So underneath the leaves, where the amaranthus is overlapping, it really helps define where one amaranthus starts and one ends. And I'm doing it very lightly with just the tip of my brush. And I'm not going overboard because I still want my light tones, midtones, and dark tones. This is kind of different. It's like a shadow tone. And with those shadow tones added, our amaranthus is finished. Now the only thing left to do is add it to our day 26 spot on our watercolor flower guide. And I think the amaranthus is a great addition to the guide because my whole inspiration for the guide was that you would have a reference for all the flowers you can paint to put into a bouquet. So it's great to have a kind of spiller flower that is spilling over in your bouquets, adding lots of movement and texture. Thanks so much for being here today while we painted day 26 amaranthus. I will see you all tomorrow for day 27.